Alright, just picking up off of the last one, I want to show you a different language this time. Now we're going to talk about styling. So we have a language that's specifically for styling the way things look, but also laying things out. And there's quite a bit to lay out, so this is going to take probably a couple videos. I mean, I spent a long time learning about layouts, but just going back to this site we made, I'm just going to add a little box here down at the bottom, still inside of the body tag, but after everything else, I'm going to create a div. So I'm just going to type div and press enter, and it creates a div for me, and I'm going to give it an ID of thing. There we go. Now if I create that, I'd see nothing. Apparently nothing's there. But now, because up here with my link element in the head of the document, I link this HTML document to the style.css document. So that means I can put things in here and it will get read and run by the browser. So I want to style this thing, and because I gave it an ID, I can actually grab it by the ID that I just gave it in this other file. So I'm going to go to the style. Remember, this ID is thing, and I want to affect it. I want to do things to it. So I'm going to go to the style.css file. HTML stood for Hypertext Markup Language. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet. I'll explain cascading eventually, but it basically allows you to style. It is a different language. You're not going to be using these pointy brackets. There's none of these really in CSS. Doesn't work the same way, but it's basically designed to grab elements from HTML, like this div element, whose ID is thing, and to set its attributes. So every element has different attributes. What's its height? What's its width? Attributes are like properties. What's its background color? What font does it use? How big is the font? Things like that. So every element has a set of attributes, and in the style file, that's where you set the attributes. So I want to grab this ID thing div. So to do that, the way you do it is you basically put the handle, and then in curly brackets, which we call a block of code, you set attributes. So the handle is how you grab something. To grab something by the ID, you need the hashtag symbol. And because its ID was thing, I'm just going to type hashtag thing, and that's how I grab this element whose ID is thing. So that's all I got to do. I've grabbed it, and now I want to set attributes like the height. Well, let's first set a border. So border, I'm going to say 1 pixel solid black. And that will create a border around my div. And so now you see it. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like a rectangle, it looks like a line. So one thing that you are seeing here is that by default, a div goes the full width of the page that it's on, but it has no height. So let me give it a height. So I'm going to say height 25 pixels, and then I run that, and now you see it has a height. There we go. Now I could also get the whole page, the whole document. If you remember, all this stuff that you see is inside of the body tag. The body element does not have an ID, so I'm not going to use a hashtag. If I want to grab something by its tag name, like this, I just type the tag name. So I'm going to go to style, and I'm going to type body. So I've grabbed the body element, and then I can set the attribute like background, and I could say yellow. And there we go. If I run that, the whole document turns yellow. Gorgeous. Okay, so one thing I also want to point out is that the div element is by default transparent. So you see yellow in the div because you are actually seeing through the div. You're seeing the body behind it. But I can set the background separately on the thing by saying background red. If I run that now, it's red. So one thing to know is that divs are the full width by default. They have no height by default unless you type words inside. Then they match the contents. And they are transparent by default, but you can set their sizes that way. These are just some elements that you can play with. You got height. You can set the width. And background color. You can also set the border. Another nice thing you can do is you can say border-radius, and if I choose something like 10 pixels, it will cut the edges and make a sort of rounded rectangle. So that's how you can make apparently rounded things. In reality, it's still a rectangle. You still want to think in terms of rectangles as you lay things out in design. But you can make things look like they're not rectangles sometimes. But deep down, it's all rectangles. Keep that in mind. There are tricks to make it look like it's not a rectangle, but at the end of the day, it's always a rectangle. So those are just a few elements. I can type inside of my div here, so I could say, let's say, hamburger. There we go. That looks ugly. But I can style it further. So in this thing, I could say font. Well, if I used color, not background, but color, I could say I want it white, and that does the font. Maybe I don't like it to have like this fancy looking serif font. So maybe I want to say font-family sans serif. And that will change the way it looks. So it doesn't have these little feet sticking off of every letter, but it's simpler. I can say font size. I could say 30-point font. Now it's too big. I'm going to take off the height restriction, so now it will be the height that it needs to be to contain things. And width, I need it to be longer, so I'll try 250. There we go. Stuff like that. So that's just the beginning of what you can do, and we will keep going, I guess, in future videos.